to the September Leadership Live. Can you guys believe that we're in September? Last day of the quarter, or last month of the quarter. So as Meredith said, she created a really cool design for this quarter. So if you completed all 3 Leadership Lives this quarter, you end up getting this pin. And let me unblur.
Uh-oh, is he still talking?
I think you're muted, Antonio.
All right, everybody can hear me?
Yeah.
Welcome, everybody, to September's Leadership Live. This is the last one of the quarter, so we'll dive right in. So thank you guys for joining. And we can go to the next slide, Dr. Lunsford. We always start with our why, and our why is to multiply the blessings and opportunities that have been put onto our trust. Here at Rosewood, we're getting a lot of new employees. Right now, we're working remote until, we all come back to the office. So if you know there's a new employee starting or anything like that, please encourage them to join Leadership Live. Please give them the updates on all the great benefits that Leadership Live does have to offer. Dr. Farrar does a great job selecting a lot of professors from Campbell and life coaches and a lot of great minds to come and join us and help us through embrace our core values, and also kind of go into the web of trying to figure out how to become better. So that is what Leadership Live is, and that is one thing that Rosewood likes to offer. And we go to the next slide. We kind of go to what was new this year. We are in Q3, which is emotional intelligence. We are kind of diving in our we before me. And this session is the last one. And we got the great Dr. Lunsford, who's been with us in the past, going to finish us off on quarter 3. And this is the pin that Meredith was talking about in the Tuesday morning meeting. It's a really cool pin with the elephants and everything. And if you guys kind of know about elephants, they kind of are really high intelligent, and they are really emotional intelligent creatures. So kudos to that one. And for everyone who's completed quarter 3, you guys will be receiving that pin later on today when you guys get back on. When you guys get back, well, you'll have it on your desk. And so no further ado, Dr. Lunsford, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Well, if you've been here before, you know a little bit about me, but my background is in mentoring and leadership development. I'm a professor of psychology at Campbell University, have been all over the U.S., including University of Arizona, and directed UNCW's Executive Education Center before I came to Campbell. I have a black belt in Shotokan Karate, which may or may not be relevant to our topic today on conflict. Hopefully none of you have to use any martial arts, but there's some lessons on recognizing when there's challenges, and we'll talk some about that. So I'm really pleased today to talk to you about conflict management. And my hope is you're going to take away 1 or 2 ideas to try out in the next week and become a conflict ninja. It ends up that I talked about emotional intelligence this week in my classes, and I have a challenge for the students to all try out a new skill, and many of them selected conflict management. It's not conflict resolution for a reason. We need some level of conflict, of disagreement in the workplace to get new ideas, innovate, think about new perspectives. So we really don't want to ever totally eliminate conflict, but we do want to manage it in a way that's really productive. And I've got some tips from research and practice to help you with that today. Well, there I was. It was two or 3 years ago, in my office at Campbell University. We'd come back in person in the fall from being online in the spring, and I'm hearing a lot of yelling in the hallway. This, of course, gets my attention. There's normally not yelling in the hallway. And I go outside of my office, and there is a student a little bit taller than me, but not a very big young man. And he is yelling at the top of his lungs at one of our professors, who is a really big guy. And Dr. Nelson just didn't really know what to do with it. And I see the student is getting closer and closer and more upset. And he was an international student, so his English was good, but he's had a bit of an accent, and he was clearly very upset. Apparently, he had been asked to leave class because he didn't have his mask on and he wouldn't wear it properly. And at that time, that was part of what we needed to do at Campbell. And so the question is, what do you do in those kind of situations? I mean, this is sort of a big one that's a bit unusual. And I walked out into the hall. And now that you know I have a black belt in Shotokan Karate, you'll know that I'm a bit aware of situations. So I kind of moved Dr. Nelson away, and I began to speak in a very low voice. So the student actually had to kind of stop yelling for a second to lean in to hear what I was saying. And I was saying very gently, we want to resolve this, but not today. We want you to go back to your dorm. Let's make an appointment, because he was so upset at that point. There was just no way to have a conversation. So I want to give you tips about how to manage conflict really well. And we came to a good resolution with this student, but it just wasn't going to happen at that moment. So we're going to talk a bit about conflict management styles, some de-escalation strategies like I just shared with you, and a framework that comes from the Center of Creative Leadership. It's called SBI, and it really is about how to talk about a situation, a behavior, and the impact to be able to provide feedback that people can hear and do something with. I want to take you, this slide should be pretty familiar to a lot of you, and I want you to think for a moment, where does conflict management line up with these ideas here? Certainly in my mind, it lines up with innovation, because being creative means sometimes there needs to be some conflict. I actually watched the movie last night about Nike and how Nike signed Michael Jordan, and there was a lot of conflict that went on with that, but it ended up that they totally innovated marketing of shoes and athletes in the sport, basketball shoe sector. Also, excellence, how can you be the best and also be generous? So when we think about conflict management or dealing with what we think might be difficult people, I want you to reframe that a little bit. Maybe they're not difficult. It's that we just need to understand where they're coming from and try some different ways to do that. I would love for you to put in the chat, and Antoni's going to help me share out, or you can just say them out loud, what you think a conflict is. And in the last month, how often have you had a disagreement with a supervisor or even a colleague? So what is conflict to how you think about it, and how often have you had a disagreement? And actually, maybe I'll stop sharing. I can see the chat too. Okay, argument. You had an argument about something. Thank you, Connie. Not being aligned. Or okay, a conflict might be an argument. It might be not being aligned on a particular thing that you need to do. What else? Okay, miscommunication, discrepancy between viewpoints, different ideas on how things should be done. I like that. I really like what you said, Sherry, because it has this negative feeling, like when we have conflict, it's not just a conversation. There is some tension or has some sort of negative impacts. It doesn't feel good. Misunderstanding, difference of opinion, disagreements. Okay, and then kind of put in the chat a number, or just share out like how many of these things, kind of got a general idea of what a conflict is. How many of you had in the last month? I see Sherry's face. She's like, I don't know. I can't count that. A 30, okay.
I don't actually have conflicts with management, but we deal with employees and different things. So sometimes it's more like, things like that, like, well, we want this. Well, you can't do that until you've done this. So it's having a conversation. So I wouldn't necessarily say it's conflict with management. That would be more of just day-to-day interaction and things like that, and how to navigate it.
Okay, yeah. Well, I'm assistant dean, so I have conflict every week. There's always people unhappy coming. Oh, well, what about this? Or somebody told me this and this isn't working, or no one wrote me about this and I'm pretty mad about it. We've got 2 from Tremikia. How about some others? Let's hear from a couple other people. We got over 40 people on the call. How about you, Bryson? Did you have a conflict in the last month?
Well, I'm general counsel for the company, so I live in conflict.
Yeah, I was going to say,
managing conflict every day. So I choose to recuse myself from answering that question and just say a lot.
A lot. All right, Connie, we've got several. Let's hear from a couple more folks. I just picked on Bryson because I could see him. How about this? In the last week, have you had any conflict whatsoever? Just give me like a thumbs up with the reaction button if you've had that. I like that, Matt. Bryson is the Chief Conflict Officer. Okay, it looks like so some of you had, not everyone perhaps has had some. Any for me to help manage with others, for you personally? And it helps to kind of think about the conflicts that you've had when we talk about some of the skills that we're going to work through. All right, now I'm going to ask you to think about something else. I want you to think of a recent disagreement. And I'd like you to rate yourself on a 1 to 10, 10 being really high, on your assertiveness in that situation and on your cooperativeness. So if you felt you were very assertive in trying to handle that, you would give yourself a 10. If you sat back and kind of let that unfold, or maybe even ignored it a little bit, you'd be a 1. And then cooperativeness is that you really worked, the extent to which you really worked with the person to get a solution versus, so then you would be more of a 10 if it was a big partnership. If it was more, you were sort of saying, hey, here's what's going to have to happen, more directive, you'd be a 1. So I want you to have a rating for yourself on these 2 dimensions. All right, I'm going to assume everybody's got that rating. And these are the ways that psychologists think about conflict management. That there's 2 dimensions, how assertive or passive we are, and how cooperative or uncooperative we are. And I want you to look at these 5 styles. So we know most people have a preference or 2 on one of these styles. So kind of looking at your dimensions, where do you think you fall? So there's the people who avoid. So they are the low conflict. Even if there is conflict, they just kind of, try to keep going or say, let's talk about that later. That would be an avoiding. Accommodating is you might often give in, just like, okay, well, we can do it this way this time because you just need to get the task done. Competing is high on assertive but low on cooperative. So you're the one trying to win, so to speak. You might be directing or telling someone, well, we just have to do it this way. Collaborating is very assertive, so you're involved with that, but you're also taking into account the other person. You're working with that person on it. And then compromising sort of in the middle. Everybody is giving up a little bit and getting a little bit, and you're sort of midway on assertiveness. So I want you to think about what's your general preference in managing the conflicts that you've been engaged in. And then I would like you to pop that in the chat, what your typical go-to style is for when you're in a conflict at work or even personally. Just pop that in the chat. Competing, collaborating, avoiding, accommodating, or compromising. Fantastic, you guys got your scores in there. Cooperative, assertive, accommodating, shoot to collaborating, accommodating, collaborating, accommodate or compromise. Yeah, that's a good point, Connie. If you're dealing with a customer, collaborating. So a lot of you are sort of in the accommodating, collaborating, and maybe 1 or 2 compromising styles. Which one do you think is the best? All right, Nicole said compromising mostly. That might be yours. Depends on the moment. All right, thank you, Sherry. You're on to something. It was a bit of a trick question. I am known to ask those. Equally important. Yeah, the one I like that. The one where you feel like you don't lose your marbles. By the way, and we talk about this with my students, when you have that feeling and when people get really, upset, someone's yelling at you, it's very hard not to have your blood pressure rise and your heart beats a little faster. But there's a part of your brain called the amygdala. And when it gets really stimulated, it takes over. So all the times you've said things you've regretted, that was your amygdala talking. So when you feel that happening, you need to exit the situation because just nothing good is going to happen with that. So I really like what Termikia said, the one where you feel like you don't lose it. Because when you lose it, there's just no win for anyone. It is very situational. So I want us to think a little bit about what situations win, because we do all have a preference that we tend to go to. And it's helpful to think about, well, when is it better to use one? I first was really studying collaboration and found myself at West Point, the military academy for the Army. And I was sitting in a class for a master's program. It was run with Columbia and the military academy. And it was me, you can't really see me very well, but I'm a very petite female person in a room of all either active military or getting ready to get out, so soon to be veterans. There were some women in there, not many, and they all had their uniforms on, and then there was me. So we're in there doing a session. That day they were doing something on leadership with conflict management. And I know you've all heard the thumb wars, where you grasp thumbs and you see who wins, is like a child game. And that was the instruction. So they said, I want you to partner up with somebody and you have 1 minute. We'll give you a 15-second practice trial. And I want you to record the number of wins on the thumb wars. So you can all envision this. If we were all in person, we would be doing this right now. So we recorded our wins, and the person then called time and, how many wins were there? Most people had a couple wins. I think maybe there were 5 or 6. With my partner, we had 30 wins between us, and they couldn't figure that out because we kind of looked at each other and we had decided to collaborate. There was no rule that said I had to win or that other person had to win. So sometimes we have a preference, we'll go, and often there it was competing. Somebody's trying to compete, or somebody's going, oh, my finger hurts today. So they were kind of in the avoiding, or the other, you just kind of give up and you let the other person win, accommodating. We all have a preference. And we tend to go to that preference, whether that was role modeling for us when we were children, but we tend to have a preference. And what I want you to think about is how to extend that to use for other situations. So there's a lot of opinions and change that we need to generate innovation and excellence. And what we really want to have is healthy conflict. And healthy conflict is really talking about the work, not the person. Aligning those expectations, and some of you talked about that, and really respecting the person and building up the team. And so how do we do that? I'm going to talk through these situations. So, there's times avoiding is really an appropriate style if it's trivial. If there's no chance you're going to get what you want, just let it go. There's a potential risk of confrontation that really outweighs any benefit of resolving it. Or maybe there's better places to resolve the issue. In all those cases, you should just avoid the conflict and try to move on, like let's just table this for now, or just ignore it. There's a time when accommodating is really appropriate. Some of you talked about customers, but the issue maybe is much more important to the other party and not so important to you. I mean, there's lots of times I might accommodate. It's like, you know what, this just isn't a big issue to me, so fine, let's do it this other way. Maybe it limits damage of continued conflict, and that might be true with customers. You want to keep customers. Maybe you want to bank some favors, so you kind of give in because next time around maybe the person will assist you and go with what you're thinking. Or if you're wrong, you should definitely just be like, you know what, I've realized listening to you that I am totally off base here. So there's times when avoiding and accommodating are very appropriate. Sometimes people think, well, avoiding is bad. No, it isn't. There's times it really is appropriate. Let's talk about compromising. I'm not always a fan of compromising just because I think everybody loses a little bit, and I want everybody to win. I prefer the collaborating, but sometimes the goals are just moderately important and they're not worth the disruption to have a more assertive mode. Or you might have 2 equally strong parties. I'm sure you've been in that situation. I have too. Have 2 very strong personalities, and they are committed to things that are not the same. And so you're just like, look, let's just everybody get a little bit of a win here. Maybe it's expedient, it's quicker, it's just easier to compromise. And it's sort of a backup to competing and collaborating. Let's take a look at competing. Sometimes you just need some quick, decisive action. You just have to get it done. And it's important and unpopular. But there's not a right way. And again, there's just the urgency. So when we tend to have that urgency, we need to take that competing style. And collaborating is when the concerns are so important to both parties that you don't really want to compromise. You want to find a win for both people. And that was what was so interesting to me last night when I was watching that Michael Jordan movie, because I don't, or about Nike, I don't know if you're aware of this, but before Jordan worked with Nike, shoe companies never gave any revenue to athletes. They just gave them a fee. They kind of licensed. And at that time, it was going to be about $250,000. And that was it. And his mother said, well, we want a percentage of the sales. And it was so interesting because Nike at that time was, way behind its competitors, Adidas and Converse. And in fact, the guy who was trying to negotiate the deal went to Phil, who was head of Nike, and said, look, man, because he said, yeah, you signed Jordan, right? I heard you're on the phone. He goes, well, no, I'm really sorry. He wants a percentage of the sales, and I know you can never get that past our board. But in this case, Phil realized, hey, you know what? These concerns are so important. We need something to save Nike, and this is very important to Michael Jordan's family, that we're gonna figure out a way to make it work. And they did. So this is how they signed Jordan, and it actually set a new standard for how athletes, the deals they brokered with shoe companies. Maybe you need some insights from different perspectives. So that collaborating is really the way to go. And it also increases people's commitment. So if you want people to have a lot of buy-in, then collaborating is the way to go. If you need that for them to do a good job, I had that recently with some faculty I work with, and they aren't on the same page about something that's actually kind of important. And one of them told me privately that she said, well, I just think this really still has to be done. And we talked about, well, but if the other person isn't bought in, it's not going to be done well. So when that's important, you need to really figure out a way to get that buy-in and collaborate. And maybe they're longer term issues, which is what this situation is. Hey, this is a long-term thing. And if they're not sold on it, it's not gonna work. So thinking about these 5 styles might help you think about when they're appropriate for different situations, in addition to just your go-to style. Like, how can you become good at all of them and realize when they're good to do? I'm gonna pause a moment and see if anybody has any comments or questions about that. And does anybody use all 5? Like, I wasn't good at using all 5 to begin with. I had to sort of work, and I'm not a very good avoider or accommodating. I'm not good at that. I tend to be more on the assertive style. So I had to really work to sit back and go, you know what? Not everything is equally important.
I can comment on that.
Yes.
I've had to learn how to use all 5, especially working with my company now, because we install closets, and so sometimes our installers have situations that come up and our customers don't want to hear that. So some days I'll get on the phone with the customer and they'll be accommodating. I can accommodate them. Other times we have to compromise. I can't do this day, but I can do this day. Sometimes I get on the phone with them and I can tell immediately, I don't want to talk to you, or they don't want to talk to me because they're super angry. So I'm going to avoid that. I'm going to let you speak to your supervisor. So I've had to use all of these situations with this company.
Was it hard to learn to do that, or did that come pretty naturally to you? Like, is it immediately obvious to you when to do it?
I've been in customer service for a very long time, because before I was here, I worked for Rent-A-Center for almost 10 years. So I've had to deal with a lot of different type of customers. So it kind of came naturally.
Well, I would say what came naturally is you've had a lot of experience. And working out sort of what's going to work with each kind of situation.
Absolutely. You could tell when you get on the phone with the customer or when you're speaking to someone where their mindset is based off of their reaction to what you initially tell them. You can tell this person's going to be angry. Or sometimes you can look at the situation and say, this person's been rescheduled 4 times. You already know they're not going to be happy about the 5th time. So you have to make the decision on, hey, do I go ahead and escalate this, or am I going to go ahead and just deal with this and see how this customer is going to react?
That's a really great point. I had to change some flights with Delta recently, and I'm on the chat. You know, they have all this chat now. And I'm telling you, that guy was doing everything. He must have been at a party trying to work for Delta, because I'm chatting with him going, are you like serving 10 other customers? Like 10 minutes has gone by and all you need to do is look up my flight. finally kind of we hang that up. I get a real person who can see that nothing has been happening on the chat, and she could tell right away, just like you said, like, okay, this is way too long. I get that you're probably already going to be frustrated, and I felt she went above and beyond to help me with my situation as a result of that. So I like also what you're saying, Kamisha, that teacher training is a good way to learn how to deal with conflict, because that's going to come up a lot with young people. All 5 consistently. Okay, good. Well, it sounds like a lot of you have a handle on these 5 styles and maybe have some names for them and ways to think about it for those of you who aren't fluent in all of them to think about these approaches. All right, de-escalation strategies. You encounter somebody, customer, colleague, maybe a supervisor who's very unhappy. How do you kind of lower the temperature on that situation? You could just share those out or put that in the chat. How do you de-escalate? Okay, ask some questions. Acknowledge the frustration. It might be like, tell me more about, let me understand why you're upset. I hear you, this is what you're saying. Find some common ground. Empathize. Having a caring tone. I think the challenge sometimes is when you realize that the situation is of the person's own making, and they're just very upset, and you're kind of like, okay, hang on a minute. Okay, seek to understand. Nobody's yelling. I know sometimes people want to yell. You just like want to be like, get out of my office. Hang up the phone. So let's take a look at some de-escalation strategies. This comes out of some work that there's some situations. Here we go. That to how to de-escalate really what can be kind of aggressive. And one of them is to really use a calm, gentle, and soft tone of voice. It ends up that humans, we tend to mirror people that we're speaking with. And so if they are very upset and kind of raising their voice and speaking quickly, if you can, instead of, again, they call it entrainment, and instead of mirroring that, if you can purposely just speak a little bit more slowly, gently, quieter, that also tends to calm the situation down. If you're in a situation where you can see the person, it's really important to keep a neutral facial expression because it's easy for us to look frustrated or angry or upset. And so really working just to have a neutral stance, even not arms crossed, just sort of very standing with your arms loose or sitting and calm. Some other effective de-escalators are just having what many of you just said in the chat, open, honest sort of communication, self-aware, like I realize I would be upset if I had been rescheduled 4 times. Non-judgmental. So that is really key, that you're not judging because it's easy for them to feel like you're saying, well, they brought this on themselves or they're at fault. And confident, like you're able to help them figure out a solution without appearing arrogant. And this comes from some de-escalation techniques they teach in healthcare settings. You can imagine there's lots of opportunity for a lot of conflict in those situations. People are upset, they're trying to see a loved one who maybe is in a hospital room and you can't see that person. And so we know that these things calm people down. Here's another scale. It's in a non-mental health situation. And I just want you to think about them and what you do. It ranges from problem solving, like let me just solve your problem, to sometimes it's just validating and listening, like, okay, let me understand what you're trying to say and I'm going to get back to you. That body language again. At times it can make sure, hey, is everything safe right here, depending on the situation? Are you okay? It might be, and some of you mentioned this, let me get you some additional support, and being very specific about when you can do that. So part of de-escalation, if it's kind of at a higher temperature, is to just bring that down through nonverbal, how you're coming across, how you're speaking, and also some verbal things you're saying, that empathy, problem solving. I can't solve it, but I can get someone who will. Another one, and this comes from some work, I have a reference at the end of the presentation on negotiation, because really at their heart, all conflict management situations are negotiations. And the first one is make sure you're using the person's name. This is a way to build empathy. So I might say, Antonio, what I hear you saying is blah, blah, blah. People like to hear their name. It makes them feel like you're actually getting what they're saying. And then using something I call tactical empathy, and it comes out of Voss's work. He was a lead FBI hostage negotiator, so talk about a conflict situation, and he's applied that in a lot of organizational settings. So if you know somebody is you already have an idea they're going to be mad at you about something, you just state it up front, get it off the table. It's called an accusation audit. So you just say, hey, you know what? You must think I'm being incredibly unreasonable to ask you to schedule this next week, or you must think that I am just so demanding because I've asked you to redo this setup. So just getting that out front, because then you want them to go, yeah, I do think that. Because once you get there, then they're like, okay, at least you get what I'm upset about, and we can move forward from that. So often people are very upset, and it's unpleasant when they think you're not hearing them about what it is. And then after you do that tactical empathy or that accusation audit, you ask how. Well, how can we, since you think that, I get it, how can we, or how can I, move forward, get where you want to get, solve what the situation is. So this is a really simple way to approach a situation that also can bring that temperature down and move it forward to conflict management. I'm going to pause for a moment. Have any of you ever tried that with, do you use the name? Have you heard of sort of this accusation audit? Like, I'm just curious if anybody's used that in the past and found it effective or not. I see Bryson doing some head nodding.
It's like customer service and sales 101. You always use the customer's names to make them feel like you're acknowledging who they are and they're not a number, so that they don't feel like they're insignificant. So yeah, it's in a lot of training. I've seen it for many years. And when talking to people, or even if you can't remember their name, you remember anything about them. Oh, you have a dog. How's your dog doing? How's your kids? We have one gentleman that's a professor that came on, and his kid's going to school in Colorado. And last time he talked to us about his closet. So every time I see him, I remember the closet and his daughter. I can't tell you his name right now. Don't snitch me out, Mr. Barbara. But that's the part, is you just remember certain things about them, so that way then they know that you remember something about them, and it creates a bond and a semblance of a trust, or so that way you can have whatever you need to do to continue on with where you're wanting to go.
Yes, and I see. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that, Sherry. And Nicole, yeah, it can be an effective method. It doesn't always work in every situation, for sure, which is why you want some toolboxes. But the accusation audit often does help bring it down. And we sometimes forget to use the names of our colleagues. So we might do it for customers, but we forget if there's a situation with a colleague to use their name. So sort of remembering that that's true in all those situations. So again, just sort of getting out front what you think, the bad thing, like often we don't want to say it. Like we know what they're thinking, but we won't want to say it. And what I'm saying, and Voss would say, is go ahead and get it out there because they're thinking it. And then you can find out, no, they aren't thinking it, or yeah, they are, but now, all right, I get it. How can we move forward? I'm going to shift gears and talk about our last tool, which is the SBI framework. Okay, I just want to see Danielle's note. I told my boyfriend I use. Oh, you would make a wonderful psychologist, Danielle. Some people are like, my husband would be like, I'm not rating anything. I just don't want to talk to you right now. But I love this, how important it is. That's nice. That's a very nice way to kind of think through, like, how important is it to you, and escalate that. So I think that can translate to workplace, because depending on the situation, you could also ask somebody, how important is this to you? And I've certainly done that with, I had a faculty member, she was dealing with another situation, and there's some problems. And I'm like, well, how big a deal is it? How important is it? Well, not very. Okay, then what do you think you might want to do here? And she's like, well, probably I should move on. Sounds good. She came up with it, right? So I didn't have to tell her, but she just needed some coaching to kind of work through that. Maybe it wasn't worth the big fight, with the web people to get something the way that she wanted it to go. Let's talk about situation, behavior, impact. Again, this is a simple framework, but the hard part is sometimes like remembering to use it. And this is when you need to give some feedback. It might be in that moment. It might be later because it was too hot a situation, but you need to address it. Is that you talk about what the specific situation was, so the person can remember the specific behavior that is creating some conflict, and then the impact. Because often people will do things because they don't recognize the impact that they're having on others. So a situation, you would say something like, hey, you know what? I wanted to talk to you about when you were at that meeting last week and we were discussing the budget. Do you remember that? And they're like, okay, yeah, I remember that situation. And then you slammed your hands down in frustration when we discussed budget cuts. Okay, yeah, I did do that. Well, it made me and others feel threatened and surprised. Did you mean to make us feel like that? Because often they're just sort of expressing their own frustration and not realizing the impact it has on other people. And they might go, well, yeah, I did mean to make you. Really? You did? Okay, well, let's talk about that. Or no, probably they're going to say, I didn't mean that. I was just really frustrated. And then you can talk about, well, what's a more appropriate response? Because we need to still have those conversations and discussions. And this happens more than we would like to think at work. When we look at conflict at work, we know that there's a really high percentage of these things. And I'm not sure that remote working makes it better necessarily because it's hard to read people's body language. So it might be things like, well, when you were, looking at your phone the whole time during the meeting, it made everybody think you weren't paying attention. When in fact, maybe they were. So this is a framework to give some of that feedback in a way that people can hear. Because if they're defensive or they feel attacked, they've just stopped listening to anything that you've said. So thinking about situation, the specific behavior and impact can help people think a little bit about the behavior change that might be helpful to resolve conflict. And I'm curious if anyone has tried something like this in the past, situation, behavior, impact, and how did it go? This would be more with colleagues, not so much probably customers. Or it could be with clients, like when you threw the people out of your house, it made it hard for us to reschedule. So this is why we might have to do it next Monday with a different team. I'm not gonna lie, I've thrown people out of my house. Like, I don't know what you're doing, but it looks like a hot mess. Like, get out, I need the person who knows how to do it to come. Anyone use this before? My son rather than yelling. Okay, yes, yeah. Yeah, that's a really good point. The thing is that often, and I've unfortunately received this feedback myself from supervisors before, they'll say, well, people think you're this way. And it's always like, well, which people? What way? Like, I can't fix it if I don't know what you're talking about. Or could you tell them to come tell me? So kind of thinking about how to be very specific. It is harder with teenagers. Although I worked in a high school for a while, I love teenagers. My husband says I have a bizarre rapport with teenagers. I'm not sure why. I seem to, actually. It's a superpower. What can I say? Why is it harder, Sherry? Because they say things that make you frustrated?
Well, one, I think then you're your own kids. When I've worked in high schools and middle schools and helped, and my kids are in all the clubs, and I was that overachiever mom. So when there's someone else's kids, then they'll listen to you because they're hearing what you're saying. When they're your own kids, they don't want to hear you. They're going to ignore you completely. You know nothing. Even if you've already done it with 4 other kids, we have 5 children. They're all out the door. You actually have one of them in your guys' Campbell family, so I'm very proud of her. But she's probably the only one out of the 5 that listens to us the most. So, but the rest of them, it's like, you don't know what you're talking about. And all you can do is sit there and smile and go, well, we'll watch this train wreck happen. All right. Let us know when you want us to come help you pack up the pieces on the side of the road. But that is the most frustrating thing. And my daddy taught it to me, honestly, when I was young. He said the hardest thing as a parent is to not help. It's the best gift you can do is not help. But it's the hardest thing to learn is not help. Just let you have to learn it and just be a sounding board. Be open to listening to them, but also know that you have to allow them the opportunity to wreck that train or crash that car and figure out how to clean up that mess too. So I think that is the hardest thing, and he nailed it. It is very hard, but it's something that we all have to learn as teaching adult children to do. When they're little and they fall down, you can kiss them and say it's going to be okay. When they're adults and they fall down, you're like, well, now what are you going to do about it? So yeah. And you guys have to see that in college kids, right? All the time when you're in there dealing with these students and stuff.
Oh no, all my students are perfect.
Of course they are. You have my daughter, I'm sure then.
Well, and you raise a good point, because I would argue that even for adults, sometimes you need to let them fix the situation and let there be a consequence. I was working with a different faculty member recently, and she was a bit overwhelmed, and she had invited all of that. I'm like, why are you doing everyone else's job for them? Well, I really care about our clients, in this case, our students. Okay, well, but you're overwhelmed and exhausted and not doing yours very well. So sometimes you have to kind of let people work out, how's this working out? Well, let's figure out another way. And using that framework, because in this case I did, well, here's the situation when you do all this extra advising in this case, for this person, this person, this person, even if they're in your program, here's the impact it's having. They learn to come to you and never go to their advisor. So now, are you really wanting to advise all of them? No? Okay. So sometimes even for grown-ups, you have to have those kind of conversations and help them sort of see that they've contributed to that problem, and let's find a way out. Well, I recognize, I appreciate kind of thinking about the specific situation, because the more specific you can be about behaviors, now you're talking about the situation, not the person. You're not saying, hey, you are being passive aggressive or you're being unreasonable or any of that. So the more you can really focus on behaviors helps de-escalate and resolve that conflict. Well, we've talked today, let me just go back to my slides, about the conflict management styles, about how to de-escalate, and about the SBI framework. And what I would love for you to do is think about one thing that you might have as a takeaway, or that you might share with someone else about how to manage conflict, and just share that in the chat. Like, what's one thing you might try out that's a little bit different? It might be that, well, you know what, I don't really accommodate a lot, let me try that out. Or I haven't really used that tactical empathy, I might try that. Or tell somebody who I think really would benefit from knowing about this. So I'd love to hear what your thoughts are. And Connie, send them. I should have camps for teenagers. I need to have like summer camps. I like them. The crazier they are, the more fun it is. So just setting an intention in the next week. Who will you tell? What's one thing you might try or share? You can share out or put it in the chat. I can see some people are thinking.
I'll hop in here. I think one of the things that I'm takeaways from this is in conversations with others moving forward this week, I'll revisit your conversations and tools and ask them, what tools they used in this particular situation and to really try to reinforce your approach. I think, an SBI approach is always very helpful because it can help to uncover differences in communication styles and what one person might have done or said might not have necessarily been their intended impact at the end of the day. And we all have this scenario where we think that we're saying what the other person wants to hear, but it might not be effectively delivered to their liking. And so understanding that it's more about perception and how that individual received what you may have said rather than the intention, and just reinforcing that as a primary tenet of how we deal with our workplace conflicts.
Thank you, Bryce, and that's a really great insight. And it makes me think of and I think when I had this image, things really changed for me. Like often when we have a conflict, we see the person standing across from us or sitting across from us. Whereas if you can envision or even actually arrange it so you're sitting with them on the same side, it just changes the dynamic totally. So it's more like, hey, we have this conflict, but I'm with you to solve it. I'm not against you. Really kind of changes that. Thank you, Brian. Verbally affirm the other person's perspective and understanding. What? Oh, sitting beside. No, it really isn't. That's Thank you, Nicole. It is a lot of information to digest, which is why I'm like, just pick one thing. If you're not doing all those things, you're not going to start doing them all. But like, what's one thing? Whether it's lowering your own voice, which actually can be incredibly effective, and it's very hard to do if you're not aware of it, because we tend to match the level of the other person, but really like with that student, bringing it down a notch just made them suddenly stop yelling, because they couldn't even, like I was whispering, they had to like lean in, like, what are you saying? And it got them out of that frame. Let's hear two more thoughts, then we'll take some comments and questions. Two more intentions. But while people are setting those intentions and putting them in the chat, I will just see if you have here. I think you'll share this, right, Antonio? You'll share this with everyone.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Because this is a really great video. It's Chris Voss. He's the one who does the tactical audit. It's never split the difference. So it's not long. It's a really good way to think about it. And then there's a lot of ideas from Harvard Business Review on managing conflicts at work. And so if you'd like to know more, these are some really good resources for that. And I will see what comments and questions you have in our time remaining. I really appreciate you all tuning in and thinking about how you can manage conflict, because truly, if you can create a better emotional climate at work, it makes things better. But we want conflict. We want people to have disagreement. It's when it's disagreeable that you need to really put these skills into place to manage it. Thank you, Raven. Yeah, and that's a great technique. So it was like really just letting them get it out and then waiting to make them feel that you've heard that. Would you say that's more of a compromising, accommodating, or avoiding style, Raven? So while Raven ponders that, what comments or questions do you have?
I think it might be a combination. I mean, sometimes it's just a matter of these are the policies, right? At least in my case in scheduling, we have certain policies that I can't override or change. And so they're not happy with it, and the outcome is going to be the same. It's all in the delivery and how we express what the policies are, and they may not be happy with it, but it does make a difference, I think, in the way you make them feel that they were heard and understood. And it's still going to be the same outcome, though. I mean, I can't change the policies because people don't like them, but I can make them feel different about our conversation and the way that the company appears in their eyes. Oh, these people don't care about us, and and that can be the outcome if you don't sound sympathetic, if you don't let them vent. I've heard people say, well, they can vent all they want, I still can't help them, but let them vent. I mean, I don't see anything wrong with that. They're upset, and it just makes a difference, I think, how the company's perceived if you allow people their feelings, and then you gently explain what I can and I can't do for you.
Well, you raise a good point, because how that's delivered, I would say that the objective outcome might be the same, but actually the outcome's really different. Because if you are more competing, like this is the rule and that's just how it is, then you've left somebody maybe not as engaged at work, and that's not as good an outcome. I mean, still they got to follow the rule, but now maybe they're looking for another job, or they're not going to put their best effort forth, versus more collaborating, which is what I heard from you. Like, look, here's what it is. How can we solve this knowing this is the policy? Or how could we make sure other people also know more about it so they're not in your same situation? And how, this more collaborating, like involving the person and interpreting and understanding the outcome, is a really different feeling. So I think that's a great observation.
Yeah, no, I meant outcome as far as what I'm able to do for them. The outcome is still the same in that sense, is what I'm capable of doing. But yeah, definitely the way it's handled, the overall outcome of the conversation can be very different. Absolutely. I agree.
Yeah, and it makes a really different way than of managing that conflict and making it better for others. Thank you for that. We have time for one more comment or question. Oh, thank you, Kamisha. I do the same and explain why I can't help. Like I'm a recruiter. I only hire new people, but I can get you to somebody. Yeah, so that's part of that scale I showed. Like maybe that's one of the skills. It's like I can't do it, but I can connect you to someone who can.
Laura, I would just add to this from a company perspective is that should you encounter conflict in the workplace, we have a great and supportive HR team who is here to help you, who are trained in conflict resolution and are more than willing to provide their assistance to help mediate an issue, or to provide you with some additional resources or tools, what may be. Conflict is inevitable, and it's all about how we approach it individually. And Laura's all given us some great tools that we can try to implement. But just a reminder that we have a team that's here to support in situations that may tend to escalate.
That's terrific. Yes, the HR office is a great first stop. And sometimes they may just be able to provide some coaching or say, hey, am I doing this the right way? Is this the right way to think about this? Well, you've been all terrific, and I really appreciate your efforts to upskill a little bit your conflict management skills. I think you will really benefit from that and benefit from sharing it with others in your workplace on how to do that. And I'm going to stick around for a couple of minutes in case people have other comments or questions, but hope you have a great rest of the day, and I'll turn it back over to you, either Dr. Fubara or Antonio.
So I don't have anything to add except thank you. That was fantastic. Antonio?
Yeah, no, that was great. Can everybody hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Sweet. Yeah, no, that was great. And like you said, conflict. I think conflict can lead into a lot of our core values. Another one, also, is innovate to elevate. Because conflict allows people to find different ways to move forward and find different ways to change into a positive, and kind of think of new alleys and stuff to kind of go through. So I really do appreciate that, Lunsford. And like she said, we'll be sharing this on YouTube, and on the YouTube description we'll include those 2 links as well, so you guys can go to the 2 links that were in the question page. So if any other questions come up, so thank you so much, and thank you so much everyone for joining.
Thanks, Laura. I appreciated your presentation today. It was great.
Well, thank you. And I feel like lawyers are ones who, you all you do is that. And I always want to go hang out with the customer service people at the lost baggage claim, like those people too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Those are the pros. Yeah, I'm also a certified mediator. And so, with that, of course, it's a little bit different as a neutral, but facilitating others' conflict resolution is, a skill in and of itself. And it often, provides some insight into the different approaches, how you deal with it in your personal life, how you deal with it in your business life, and how you help others resolve conflict. So I think that those are all 3 very different things that we can all choose to learn from.
Well, thank you for those comments. And I appreciate what you shared today during the session too.
Sure. Absolutely. Thanks again.